Happy Thursday! We are reading chapter 6 and 7 today. Jack and Annie are on their way to try and find the Ice Wizard's eyeball, which was given to a frost giant that they now have to rescue, so their adventure kind of keeps getting bigger and bigger. Do vocabulary first, then we'll get right into it. Okay, first word is knelt, meaning to kneel, past tense. Rudder is what you use to steer a ship or a boat. Staff, large wooden pole used to help with support, can also be a magical instrument. Tapestry is a woven picture made out of threads hung on a wall. Trudged means to kind of walk heavy and slow. A column is something that supports a roof. And the Norns, we learned about yesterday, we read about them, are three sisters who basically create people's fates and stories by weaving them into large tapestries. And they usually involve a lot of string in their stories. The fates in Greek myth have that string that I was talking about. Alright, so Jack and Annie visited the Norns. The Norns told them that they have to go and find the Ice Wizard's eyeball themselves. It is in a hill that is protected by a frost giant, and they have to go in there and get it without ever looking at the frost giant, because otherwise they'll freeze to death. So, not at all scary. I'm sure they can do it no problem. Alright, chapter 6, In the Hollow Hill. Standing in the cold, Jack was afraid again. There were big paw prints in the snow all over the house. The wolves were definitely here, said Kathleen. Maybe we should go inside, said Teddy. No, said Kathleen. We must walk with Jack and Annie to the sleigh and send them on their journey to Hollow Hill. Of course, said Teddy. As they all headed towards the rocks, Jack glanced back at the Norn house. He wished they could return to its cozy warmth. Kathleen put her hand on his shoulder. Come, she said, you must hurry. Jack trudged with the others through the passage in the rocks. When they got to the other side, there were no sign of the white wolves. The silver sleigh was waiting in the moonlight, and Jack and Annie climbed in. Won't you come with us? Jack asked. Remember, you said if we work together, we can do anything. That's true, said Teddy, but what the Ice Wizard also said is true. Only mortals can undo a bargain with the fates. Do not fear, said Kathleen. We will be with you in spirit, and we will meet you at the wizard's palace at dawn. How will you get there, said Annie. I have a few rhymes to try, said Teddy. And I have a bit of Selkie magic, said Kathleen. And we have our wind string, said Annie. Hasten then to the Hollow Hill, said Kathleen. And remember what the Norn said Teddy. Never look at the frost giant. I know, said Jack. He pulled on the wind string and took off his gloves and untied a knot. The breeze began to blow. Jack untied a second knot. The breeze grew stronger, the sail unfurled, and the runner slid forward. Jack untied a third knot, and the wind blew harder. The white sail snapped, and the sleigh took off through the night. Stand fast, Teddy called. Jack and Annie waved goodbye to Teddy and Kathleen as the that's a tongue twister, as the sleigh slid swiftly over the sea ice. Soon the sleigh bumped into the snow-covered plain and veered off sharply to the right. No, North Star, Jack called to Annie. Annie turned the rudder, steering the sleigh on course. They sailed through the bright star in the distance. As the silver runner swished across the snow, Jack braced himself against the cold. He kept a lookout for the wolves, but he didn't see anything as the sleigh sped across the moonlit plain. Soon he could see a row of snow-covered hills in the distance. Look, he said, there it is. He pointed to one of the hills, which was the only one without a peak. Tie her down, Annie shouted. Jack tied a knot in the string, and the sleigh began to slow down. He tied a second, then a third. The wind died down completely, and the sleigh coasted to a stop at the foot of the hollow hill. Jack and Annie climbed out. Jack looked up at the steep white slope. How do we get in? He said. Dunno, said Annie. How do you think the frost giant gets in? The frost giant, said Jack. He really wished Teddy and Kathleen were with them. He felt like a part of their team was missing. Annie read his thoughts. We can do it, though, she said. We have to, for Morgan and Merlin. Jack nodded. You're right, he said. They studied the hill in the moonlight. Is that an opening up there, maybe? Said Annie. Maybe, said Jack. Let's climb up and find out. When they climbed up the hill, Jack could clearly see a break in the snow-covered slope. Let's see if it leads inside, said Annie. Wait, said Jack. What about the frost giant? I have a feeling he's not here, said Annie. We should just go in and find the wizard's eye before he gets back. Okay, said Jack, but be careful. They scurried up the slope. When they came to the opening, they stepped through a huge crack in the wall. Jack and Annie found themselves on a ledge surrounding a deep, rounded hollow. Moonlight flooded down the open hilltop. At the bottom of the hollow was a flat spot where it looked like the snow had been blown in a circle. I bet that's where the frost giant sleeps, said Jack. Yeah, it's probably where he hides his eye, said Jack. We just have to find a hole, remember? He repeated what the Norns had said. In the hollow hill is a hole. In the hole is the hailstone. In the heart of the hailstone hides the wizard's eye. Right, said Annie. Jack looked at the snowy swirl and then at Annie. Onward? Onward, she said. They scrambled down into the hollow. Stepping carefully through the silver moonlight, they studied the ground, looking for a hole. Annie stumbled and fell. Whoa, she said. I think I just found the hole. Actually, I think I just stepped in it. Really? Said Jack. He knelt down beside her. Annie reached into the small hole in the floor of the hollow. There's something here, she said. She pulled out a chunk of ice the size of an egg. The hailstone! In the dim light, it was impossible to see if anything was inside the ice chunk. We don't know if this is the right one, said Jack. We'll have to wait till daylight to see if the eye's in there. It has to be, said Annie. How many hailstones are going to be hidden in a hole in a hollow hill? Oh, good point, said Jack. Annie turned the hailstone over in her hand. Maybe the eye is looking at us right now, she said. That's scientifically impossible, said Jack. An eyeball can't look unless it's attached to a brain. Well, yeah, but a string can't make the wind blow either, said Annie. Forget science in this place. Wait, she caught her breath. Did you feel that? Feel what? Said Jack. The ground is shaking, said Annie. Jack did feel the ground trembling. He heard a strange sound, too, a large huffing sound coming from outside the hill. It sounded like heavy breathing. The giant's back, said Annie. Oh, no, cried Jack. The ground kept rumbling, and the breathing got louder. Hide the hailstone, said Jack. Annie shoved the ice into her pocket. It sounded like the giant was coming in. He's coming, said Annie. Hide, said Jack. Jack pulled Annie into the shadows, and he remembered what the Grey Norn had said. Anyone who looks directly at the frost giant will freeze to death at once. Whatever you do, don't look at him, said Jack. Crouching in the dark, they buried their faces in their hands and waited. Chapter 7. The Frost Giant. With each breath of the frost giant, a blast of freezing wind swept through the hollow. Jack trembled and felt chilled to the bone. The giant's breathing grew louder and stronger. Jack squeezed his eyes shut as icy wet wind rushed his body. Jack crouched lower and held on tightly to Annie. The giant's breath howled like 100 ghosts through the hollow. Jack thought of the Norn's words. He is a blind force of nature that spares nothing in his path. But then the giant's breathing grew softer. What's happening? Jack wondered. The breathing grew softer and softer. He's sleeping, Annie said. The breathing was now calm and steady, and the wind was a light breeze. I think the frost giant's sleeping, said Annie. We should probably try sneaking out of here. Okay, but keep your eyes down. Just look at the ground, said Jack. Right, said Annie. Their heads bowed, they crept cautiously across the floor of the hollow and began climbing up through the crack. Jack's teeth were chattering, but he didn't know if it was cold or fear. Suddenly, a deafening roar shook the night. The frost giant screamed with a windy rage. He was awake. Jack was blown to the ground. He tried to crawl across the snow, but he didn't know which way to go, and he was afraid to look up. Jack, this way, Annie's voice called out of the roar of the giant's breath. She helped him up, and they struggled together against the wind. Finally, they came to a crack in the wall. They scrambled through the crack. Outside, the wild wind knocked them over, and they tumbled down the hill. The wind swirled across the snow. Annie, Jack called. Where was she? Where was the sleigh? He couldn't see anything. The wind roared louder, and an avalanche of snow came crashing down the hillside. When it hit the ground, the snow exploded into clouds of white powder. Jack! Jack! Jack heard Annie's voice in the screaming wind. He tried to stand up. The snow kept falling on top of him, and he was completely covered. As Jack laid under all the snow, he knew all the strength left his body. He knew he should dig his way out, but he was way too cold and too tired. He was too tired to look for Annie, and too tired to fight the frost giant. Instead, he closed his eyes and drifted to sleep. Jack dreamed that cold fur brushed his face. He dreamed a wolf was digging around him, nudging him, pushing him, sniffing him. Jack opened his eyes. He was dazed, and at first he couldn't see. But he could feel he wasn't buried anymore. He wiped off his glasses and saw a low moon and stars in the sky. The frost giant must have left, Jack thought. But then he heard a panting noise. He sat up and looked around. One of the white wolves was behind him. Jack scrambled to his feet. "Go!" he shouted. The wolf stepped back and growled. "Go away!" he shouted. The wolf stepped back. Oh, sorry, I already read that part. "Go!" Jack shouted again. He picked up handfuls of snow and threw them at the wolf. The wolf backed away. Jack looked around wildly. Annie was lying very still on top of the snow. The other wolf was sniffing and pawing her. Jack's anger made him fearless. "Leave her alone!" he shouted. "Go!" He scooped more snow and threw it. The wolf stepped back. "Go!" Jack shouted. "Get away! Leave us alone!" He glared at them. The wolves stared back at Jack, and their yellow eyes gleamed. "I'm not kidding," said Jack. "Go!" Jack stared fiercely at the wolves. Finally, the wolves looked away. They glanced at each other and backed off. They looked at Jack and Annie one last time, and then turned and trotted away over the snow. Jack rushed to Annie and knelt beside her and lifted her head. "Wake up!" he said. Annie opened her eyes. "You okay?" said Jack. "Yeah, I dreamed about white wolves," said Annie. "Me too," said Jack, "and when I woke up they were here about to eat us." "Really?" Annie said, and sat up and looked around. "Yeah, but no worries, I scared them off," said Jack. "What about the frost giant?" Annie said. He's gone too," said Jack. "Come on, let's get out of here. You still have the wizard's eye, right?" Annie felt in her pocket. "Yep, got it," she said. "Cool," said Jack. He looked around. Do you guys think that the wolves were getting ready to eat Jack and Annie? Or do you think maybe they were doing something different? Let me know in the comments. Jack looked around. Beyond the heaps of fallen snow, the silver sleigh was waiting. Overhead, the sky turned to a light gray. "It's almost dawn," said Jack. "Remember, we have to get back by the break of day, or we'll never see Morgan and Merlin again." Jack held Annie's hand, and they trudged together through the snow. When they got to the sleigh, they climbed up. Annie took her place at the rudder, and Jack pulled on the windstring and untied a knot. The breeze rocked the sleigh. He untied a third knot, and the sail began to fill. He untied a second knot, and the sail began to fill. He untied a third, and the silver sleigh moved forward, gliding over the ground. Swish, swish, swish. The sleigh moved through the thick snow and away from the hollow hill. As they sailed over the white plain, the sky turned gray to pale pink. "We've got to go faster," said Annie. Jack untied a fourth. The wind was whistling now. The sleigh picked up speed, and Annie steered it past rocks and over sea ice. She steered it over the plain, south to the palace of the Ice Wizard. When the sleigh grew close, Jack tied a knot, and they slowed down. He tied 3 more, and the sleigh came to a stop. They looked around in the faint, cold light. "I wonder where Teddy and Kathleen are," said Annie. "They said they'd meet us here at dawn." Jack studied the vast white plain, but he saw no sign of their friends. He wished he had Kathleen's vision. "I hope they're okay," he said. "I hope they didn't run into the wolves." "I have a feeling the wolves wouldn't hurt them," said Annie. "The wolf in my dream seemed nice." "Dream wolves are different from a real wolf, though," said Jack. "I don't think we can stand to wait," said Annie. "The eye has to be back by the time the sun comes up." "The eye," said Jack. "We never even looked to see if there was an eye in the hail." Annie reached in her pocket and pulled it out. Jack gasped. Staring at him from inside was an eyeball. It was the size of a large marble. The eyeball was white with a sparkling blue center. "Oh man," said Jack. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" said Annie. Would you guys like to find a random eyeball in some snow? That'd be kind of gross. "I don't know," said Jack. Seeing it felt queasy. Seeing an eye outside of a human head was a little weird for him. "Put it away," he said. Annie put the hailstone back in her pocket, and Jack looked around. The sky had brightened from pale pink to red. A thin sliver of the sun was peeping up over the horizon. "The sun!" cried Jack. "Hurry up!" He and Annie jumped out of the sleigh and charged towards the palace. When they got to the entrance, Annie stopped. "Look," she said, and she pointed to paw prints. "Wolf prints!" "Oh no," said Jack. "Do you think they're inside?" "That would be weird." "Doesn't matter," said Annie. "We have to go. Hurry!" They rushed into the palace just as the fiery ball of the sun rose up over the horizon. And that's where we're going to stop for today. So my question for you is, do you agree with Annie? Do you think that the wolves are being mean and trying to kill them, or do you think that they have a different purpose? Why do you think they were with Jack and Annie when they were buried in the snow? What do you think the wolves were doing, and what might the wolves be trying to do? And where do you think Teddy and Kathleen are? So hit me up in the comments, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye, guys!